A pleasure to be here with you. And thanks for everyone for joining us. So I've decided to share with you a work in progress. It is still fuzzy around the edges, and for this reason, I really look forward to getting feedback following my talk. Okay. Several months ago, I came across this 2018 New Yorker article, What Termites Can Teach Us. What termites can teach us, it turns out, spoiler alert, is somewhat contradictory. That is, termites can teach us more than we might imagine, but also much less than we might hope. Termites, for those of you who are unfamiliar, are remarkable creatures, or more precisely, termite colonies are remarkable. The insects themselves are relatively feeble. Most are blind with tiny brains. And if you were to put a dozen termites in a conducive environment, they'd be more apt to spend their days like teenagers on a couch in the summer, aka my son right now, than like the industrious workers on an assembly line that we tend to associate with ants, bees, and other eusocial insects, including termites. But put 100 or a couple million termites in the same environment, and that's when you'll see them start to earn their reputation for astonishing feats of collective intelligence. Termites, for instance, are known as the architects of the animal world, building giant earth mounds that soar up to 30 feet high. Termites are also considered among the world's first farmers, insofar as some species cultivate a particular fungus that aids in the digestion of wood and grass. With these skills that map so very neatly onto anthropocentric concepts like agriculture and architecture, it's not surprising that termite swarm cognition, along with their symbiotic relationships with their mounds and their fungi, have long fascinated scientists and engineers. Some see termites' ability to build life-sustaining mounds out of Earth as inspiration for constructing shelters on Mars, while others have experimented with using termites for exploratory mineral mining. For years, scientists have worked to understand and mimic termite digestion in order to produce so-called grassoline as an alternative biofuel. And about a decade ago, Harvard roboticists started working on designs for termite-inspired robots capable of building structures collectively. Again, the goalpost being the eventual colonization of Mars. At the same time as scientists and engineers have raced to understand and mine insects, and especially swarm intelligence for technological progress, in the popular imagination, the term conjures any number of scenarios, from the graceful murmurations of starlings in the evening sky to Alfred Hitchcock's malevolent crows attacking a terrified Tippi Hedren in The Birds. In technomilitary contexts, too, dystopian narratives are alarmingly easy to find and usually involve terrifyingly sentient mechanical entities. In 2017, the AI ethics think tank, Future of Life Institute, released an 8-minute video, Slaughterbots, a near-future dramatization of a swarm of autonomous micro-drones launched by bad actors as weapons of mass destruction against political enemies. At around the same time, the Pentagon began testing its own micro-drones, and they now claim to have the capacity to act as a collective organism, sharing one distributed brain for autonomous decision-making and adapting to each other, quote, like swarms in nature. But if the swarm constitutes the soul of the collective military imaginary, feminist scholars have also begun to develop important insights into the deeply ambivalent figuration of insect life, and the swarm in particular, in the human imaginary, and into the ways in which this ambiguity gets taken up in feminist appropriations of swarm imagery. From speculative fiction like Charlotte Perkins Gilman's Herland trilogy of 1915, in which feminist collectives are presented as insect-like swarms, through to the insect metaphors that dominate representations of Beyonce or Queen Bee and her legions of fans, the beehive. The swarm has repeatedly been imagined in ways that transcend its contemporary military politics. In these matriarchal colonies, unconcerned with filiation and patrilineal descent, becoming insect, to quote Lauren Wilcox, becomes a site for non-heteronormative utopian configurations. So against this backdrop, contemporary artists have also grappled with both the technological promise and the civilizational dangers of artificial intelligence, and in many instances, the swarm reappears as a harbinger of a better world to come, what Cory Doctorow calls the adjacent possibles that are the mainstay of speculative art and fiction, but that are also crucial for imagining the actual future. And so I've been interested for a while now in art practices in which swarm intelligence is imagined and tested, again, not for its not for its militaristic potential, not for its use value as a farmer, an architect, or a miner, but instead as a speculative model for collaboration with our human and non-human companions and kin. As Srinivasan rightly notes in her New Yorker article that I started this talk with, the termite is no longer what it was to earlier observers. This is a whole other section of the paper that I won't be sharing. No longer a model of what humans could be, more cooperative and harmonious, less competitive and aggressive. Instead, it's become a resource to be harnessed for the achievement of our own already established ends. But artists, I want to suggest, are thinking and imagining otherwise. So, in around 2014, while the Harvard engineers were building their robo-termites, New York-based Polish artist Agnieszka Kurant traveled to Namibia with a team of termite researchers to study the construction habits of Namibian macrotermes termites, whose giant earth mounds, as I've mentioned, can climb to 30 feet. In human equivalents, this would be twice the height of the Burj Khalifa in Dubai. Termite mounds are built with a mixture of dung, termite saliva, mud, and wood chip. Although they appear to be solid, the mounds are actually porous, and the walls are filled with tiny holes that allow outside air to enter and circulate around and inside the structure. Termites don't live in the mound, but rather in an underground nest below. These elaborate ventilation and cooling systems ensure that oxygen reaches the lower areas of the mound and keeps the nest from overheating. They're often referred to as kind of prosthetic lung. All of this building and maintaining is achieved thanks to a distributed cognition, which, according to physiologist and termite researcher J. Scott Turner, operates much like the assembly of cognitive maps in the brain. So for her series, which she called AAI, Agnieszka Kurant and a term of termite experts lured a number of termite colonies to areas that were pre-stocked with a colorful array of materials, including glitter, crystals, and colored sand. The termites set to work building mounds out of these materials, and the result was these sparkling sculptures that look exactly like termite mounds. In fact, they are termite mounds, but with these vivid colors and sparkles that made them hover, as the artist suggests, between nature and culture, between the biological and the synthetic. There's a lot going on in this series, which raises a lot of significant questions, for instance, about notions of authorship. For now, I want to home in on one aspect in particular, and that's the idea of artificial intelligence, referenced, of course, in the title. The term AAI was actually coined by Jeff Bezos to describe his Amazon Mechanical Turk platform, launched in 2005, to outsource piecemeal digital labor to anonymized and poorly paid gig workers. This occlusion of human labor, so brazenly referenced in Bezos's terminology, would turn out to be just the opening salvo in the construction of a vast hidden global workforce undergirding the next dozen years of AI development. More than a dozen. 20 years. There we go. Consider the human labor that is extracted without permission, credit, or compensation from artists, writers, coders, gamers, filmmakers, law clerks, teachers, doctors, architects, etc., whose work is condensed and processed into data points to feed the hungry large language and diffusion models of Gen AI. Or the so-called ghost workers, mostly in the global south, who are subcontracted, often in extremely exploitative circumstances, to tag, annotate, fact check, moderate, and scrub the raw data that's fed into these Gen AI systems like Claude, Stable Diffusion, GPT-4, etc. We often speak of AI as if it were a property held inside the imagined mind of a single automated figure. But of course, it's in fact a collected intelligence, and articulously gleaned, indeed stolen, from millions of inputs from countless sources and people. So for AAI, Agnieszka Courant performs an analogous outsourcing maneuver. As she says, most people are completely unaware when they're being exploited, unaware or at the very best, unable to avoid it. I was really interested to technically demonstrate, she says, how labor can be harnessed unbeknownst to the worker. I'm like an evil investor, she says. But even while the work is reflecting back to us our all too human forms of exploitative labor practices, AAI also points forward to imagine models, vocabulary, and toolkits to think about artificial intelligence in new ways. In his most recent book, Ways of Being, artist and technologist and writer James Bridle asks, what would it mean to build artificial intelligences and other machines that were more like octopuses, more like fungi, or more like forests? What would it mean to us and to them to live among them? And how would doing so bring us closer to the earth which our technology has sundered? So for me, the insight to be gleaned from Courant's work through Bridle's insights, the insight to be gleaned from Courant's work with her unwitting termite collaborators, what art might be able to teach us about what termites can teach us about artificial intelligence, although I adopt a pedagogical model with extreme caution here, especially in relation to art, is that we as human society have options when it comes to the development of artificial intelligence, especially when we're drawing on non-human animals for inspiration. We can continue to produce models that purport to be reaching for Mars or singularity or whatever, but which mainly crank out bland, insipid term papers and hallucinated legal case filings. Or we can look differently at non-human intelligences for different ways of doing business. So notice these colorful, glittery mounds in the gallery setting. Their use value is basically nil, especially here in the gallery, shellacked and abstracted from their original site. They certainly aren't headed to Mars anytime soon. They reject uniformity, instead reflecting the rich diversity of termite colonies themselves. As the Harvard roboticists learned in their study, the extended cognition of termites produces the capacity to respond to complex situations in complex ways that still aren't even understood by humans, let alone allowing them the understanding to mimic these behaviors with their robots. Interestingly, the researchers also discovered that termites are not so much industrious drones as they are denizens of some kind of post-capitalist utopia. In a petri dish of 25 termites, only 5 appear to work at any one time. In other words, as the roboticist Kirsten Peterson put it, if termites were actually factory workers, most of them would probably be fired. Peterson's data and Courant's sculptures reveal a world that is so much more intuitive, so much more sparkly, less robotic than the more mechanistic views of termites that humans have been able to imagine. And to that end, they might just be able to model or help to model a new set of speculative futures for artificial intelligence and for our relations, our production of it and our relations with it. Okay. In her 2023 exhibition, Maze, MEYS, French artist Marguerite Humeau likewise operates at the intersections of termite intelligence and artificial intelligence to imagine new ways of understanding cognition. Defining cognition is a larger part of this project. I'm not going to refer to it in this paper, but it's a big question, of course. So she's intersecting termite intelligence and artificial intelligence to imagine new ways of understanding cognition and new ways of being in the world. A key inspiration for Humeau is the Macrotermes genus of termites, whose enormous colonies of up to 2 million inhabitants not only build and maintain the tallest recorded termite mounds, but also cultivate this particular fungus known as termitomyces, which helps them digest grass and wood. The symbiotic relations that constitute termites, fungus, and mound, and that sustain these colonies are both represented and reenacted in Humeau's work, especially in the 17 sculptures we were just looking at, large biomorphic objects in a range of materials, including beeswax, reclaimed wood, blown glass, terracotta, honey, and venom. The works were produced in collaboration with OpenAI's text-to-image generator DALL-E, but also with a human hive of 50 artists and artisans that Humeau brought together for the project. Okay. Especially interesting to me is this work, also in the exhibition. It's called Collective Effervescence. It's a 3-minute video. I've got 50 seconds on a loop. So in her study of these Macrotermes colonies, Humeau discovered that it was impossible to access images of termites in their underground nests. And so she turned to DALL-E with the prompt to create a termite dance around a fungus. She wanted to think about this as a ritualistic process rather than a mechanical process. She wanted to think about the stories perhaps that termites are telling themselves, just like we tell so many stories about our origins, about our futures. She took the images that were produced by DALL-E and she engaged a human animator to generate these images into this film. So again, you have this collaboration of humites. There's where we're going. So again, you have this collaboration of humans and artificial intelligence imagining termite world, much like Keren collaborated with humans and termites to imagine an artificial intelligence world. So Humeau describes her video as an effort to bring the swarm intelligence of termite colonies into conversation with the collective or collected imagination that feeds artificial intelligence, as a speculative way to construct new mythologies, stories, archetypes, and models that might help make sense of our world and offer new patterns for living. But I want to suggest, somewhat against her own reading, that this work's main contribution isn't to make sense of the world, but rather to rattle our desire to make sense of the world. As I watch these zany little AI-generated termite figures dance around their fungal kin, I'm led to again, kind of fuzzy conclusions. So bear with me. First, in the end, termites have nothing to teach us. They don't exist to teach us anything. Beyond that, they're difficult, if not impossible, to instrumentalize, notwithstanding all the best efforts of all the best scientists and engineers in the world. Their complex processes of symbiosis and stimergy are largely uncomputable. But artists, likewise unbound by the mandates of human science and engineering to compute, instrumentalize, synchronize, and render efficient their technologies, artists have a lot to teach us about how to comprehend both the limits of machine learning and the creative potential of collective intelligence. And in the process, I want to suggest artists like Keren and Humeau create a space to imagine collective intelligence as a counterpoint to what James Bridle calls our horror stories about the development of opaque technological infrastructures and of dangerously asymmetrical intelligences and power relations, the whole doom and boom scenario. As Bridle continues, and as I want to conclude, because I think it's beautiful, it simply doesn't have to be this way. And moreover, it doesn't want to be this way. It's possible to live as symbionts rather than subjects, as equally valid and responsible inhabitants of a messy, more than human world. Thank you very much. Here is a bibliography.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. It was absolutely captivating. I could not take my eyes off.
That's why I kept showing it.
My